Prince George restrains his younger brother's trademark charm. It was the sort of thing he wore every day at Lambrook. However, he wasn't going up Adelaide Cottage's stairs by himself this time. A boy of his age trailed closely behind him, dressed in loose-fitting clothing, his sneakers worn and partially torn at the sides. One of the cottage personnel froze from the window. George frequently brought something home, whether it was a book from the school library, a wayward football, or even anecdotes about new students. However, this was not like the others. This boy didn't appear to be a fellow student. He was disoriented and doubtful that he should have been there at all. George, on the other hand, exuded the little confidence that comes from a child who believes they are doing the right thing and doesn't care how strange it may appear to grown-ups all. Prince William was back inside, going over some paperwork from one of his environmental charities. The majority of the meetings he attended that morning were regular. He was just getting dressed for the weekend, wearing jeans and a cozy jumper, and was eager to spend the afternoon with the children. However, a staff member intervened. Not wanting to come across as alarmist, she continued softly, "Sir, I think you should come see this." She didn't have to. Her voice alone told William that something unexpected had just arrived. He watched George enter the corridor as he walked outside, using one hand to grip his backpack strap and the other to gently prod the other youngster forward. George raised his head and gave a small smile. "This is Jacob, Dad," he said. There was nowhere for him to go. William blinked, winked. That was unexpected. He glanced at the other boy, who stood with his eyes fixed on the ground, seemingly undecided on whether to remove his shoes or dash back outdoors. William carefully said, "Hello, Jacob. How about you two enter the kitchen?" George didn't require two reminders. As if it were the most commonplace thing in the world, he walked Jacob down the corridor. William came next, too interested to stop it, yet still not sure what had just transpired. Kate was unpacking groceries in the kitchen. Startled, she turned to see the strange boy standing next to her son. "George?" she inquired. "This is Jacob, Mom," he said again. "During break, we were playing football close to the school's perimeter. He claimed that although he no longer attends school, he still lives nearby. He replied that he doesn't currently have a home when I questioned why." Kate glanced from George to William, her eyes widening a little. The rapid rush of adult concern, the kind that wants to help but also needs more information, was what happened, but it wasn't panic. George said, "I told him he could come with me. I believed we could assist him." The ensuing quiet was contemplative. William lowered himself so that his eyes met Jacob's. "Mate, what is your age?" Gently, he inquired. Jacob replied, just above a whisper, 11, the same as George. Jacob gave a nod. Kate moved nearer and also knelt down. "Do you feel hungry?" He gave another nod. "Half-filled." Kate had a dish of fruit and toast ready in a matter of minutes. Sitting beside Jacob, George pointed out items in the room as if he were showing a friend around his house. It was a powerful dynamic. The two boys did not feel uncomfortable with each other. Jacob wasn't being treated like a helpless victim by George. He was acting as though he was a member of the group. Kate and William looked at each other. Their eyes were cautious, but not filled with fear. They hadn't been prepared for this, at least not from all the parenting manuals and royal etiquette they had read over the years. William politely inquired about Jacob's parents' whereabouts after he finished his meal. Jacob's responses were straightforward yet sufficient to illustrate the situation. Since his mother lost her job, they have been relocating and sleeping in shelters in their car at different times. It had been months since he had attended school. He didn't voice any complaints. He gave a straightforward explanation, to be honest, like a child would. George had also paid attention on seeing faces and see. William was very astonished by that. His youngster had not simply walked on after hearing a depressing tale. He had paid attention, and he had taken action. William and Kate sat together in the living room later that evening after Jacob had been dressed and had finished playing in the garden with George and Charlotte. "This isn't something that will happen once, is it?" quietly Kate asked. "No," William said, "not for George." He saw the two boys chuckle while kicking a ball around outside the window. Jacob smiled like he hadn't in days, obviously more at ease now. William recalled how, as children, Diana had taken him and Harry to shelters. She had shown them what those outside the palace gates had to live through. That was something he had always remembered, and now George had done something pretty similar without being asked. William did nothing except observe, because he knew in his heart that this was not yet over. The entire atmosphere of Adelaide Cottage had changed by the following morning. A youngster who had come from the streets was now sleeping under the same roof as the future king, and the quiet buzz of something new filled what had previously been a peaceful house in Windsor's protected estate. Jacob was given a comfortable bed, fresh clothes, and the impression that he was valued. In order to see if Jacob was still there, Prince George got up earlier than normal. His new companion was still asleep, tucked beneath the blankets with the dog Lupo's old blanket slung across his legs when he padded across the hallway and entered the guest room. Kate was already awake and back in the kitchen. Instead of a royal schedule, she was holding a list. This was a mother's list, things to prepare, calls to make, and outfits to buy. Because she was not unprepared, despite the fact that the circumstance had taken her by surprise. She was aware of the type of house she and William had devoted their lives to creating. She was not going to allow fear or misunderstanding to shake that. William, meantime, pondered everything while sipping a mug of tea outside. He had spent years learning how to better connect with his own children, having grown up in a palace where emotions were not always accepted. However, George had gone one step farther. William made a few more low-volume phone calls later that day. He didn't want to make a story out of Jacob's predicament. This was not something that should be publicized or presented as a humanitarian endeavor. He made contact with a nearby support facility outside of Windsor, the same one Diana used to discreetly attend in the 1990s. He kept George's involvement out of the narrative and simply provided them with the information they need. "Are you okay with us taking him?" It was a polite question from the woman on the phone. William took a while to respond. "Not yet," he responded. "For now, let's just leave the line open. Go back inside." Jacob was seated at the dining table with George. Charlotte sat close by, interested but not intrusive. Since he was younger, Louis was mostly interested in Jacob's trainers, which had been swapped out that morning for a fresh pair from a local store. They were warm and sturdy, rather than ostentatious or designer. George started nibbling a piece of toast and glancing at Jacob. "You may wait under the trees when we return to school. I'll come out as soon as I can." Jacob nodded but stayed quiet. He wasn't quite sure how long he was allowed to stay here or what the rules were. That night, William pulled George aside for a private conversation in the sitting room. There was no scolding, no raised voice. William had never believed in that approach. Instead, he crouched down to his son's level. "George," he said, "can I ask you something?" George looked up. "Why did you bring Jacob here?" There was a long pause. George's mouth twisted a little, as if he wasn't sure how to explain it. "He looked cold," he said at last, "and kind of tired. He didn't ask me for anything. He just sat there, and I didn't think it was fair." William nodded slowly. "You know," he said gently, "you did something very brave, but you also did something big, something that comes with responsibility." Oh, George looked uncertain now. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," William said quickly. "You didn't do anything wrong. You did something I admire, but I want you to understand what comes next. Jacob's life isn't like yours, and he might need things we can't give him ourselves. But that doesn't mean we walk away." George nodded. He didn't have all the answers, but he understood enough. "I want to keep being his friend," he said. "You can." William replied, "We just have to find the right way to do it." That evening, Kate found William standing by the garden window again. Jacob and George were tossing a football between them. There was laughter, light, careless, like kids should be. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" Kate asked softly. "I think we're doing the only thing we can," William answered. Over the next few days, Jacob stayed with them just as someone who belonged for now. William arranged for regular check-ins with the local council and child services. They were discreet, careful not to alarm Jacob or treat him like a case. Kate took on the softer details, meals, helping Jacob feel comfortable, making sure he had the same kinds of small joys the other children did. She even asked their favorite housekeeper to add his name to the breakfast tags. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world. Nah. As for George, he never bragged about what he did. In fact, he hardly spoke about it at all to others. He just acted like Jacob had always been there. But William and Kate knew better. They saw it in how their son walked taller, not out of pride, but out of purpose. They saw it in how he watched Jacob not to manage him, but to include him. And they saw it in how their home had become more alive, more open, more real. Still, they both knew this moment wouldn't last forever. Something was coming. And when it did, the world outside the gates might finally catch on to what was happening inside. The following Wednesday, the family had managed to keep Jacob's presence quiet. But that kind of privacy never lasted long in royal life. Even for someone like William, who had spent years building barriers between the public and his personal world, nothing stays hidden forever. That morning, George and Jacob were playing in the garden when a royal staff member approached William with an iPad in hand. Wait a home. It's starting to spread, sir, she said. A local posted something yesterday. Said she saw a second boy walking into the cottage with Prince George last week. Didn't name names, but people are asking. William took the device and scanned the article. It wasn't hostile, not yet, just curiosity. But that's how these things usually begin. Someone notices something, and within days the press starts circling, trying to fill in the blanks with whatever they can get. Inside the house, George didn't seem concerned. Jacob had been with them for several days now. And to him, this was just how things were. They played football, watched movies, and read books in the study like any other school holiday. Jacob even helped Charlotte build a puzzle the day before. It was the most relaxed anyone had seen him since he arrived, but William knew this peaceful window was closing. If the story caught traction, Jacob's privacy would be the first casualty. He met Kate in the upstairs hallway, just outside the children's rooms. She had just tucked away laundry and looked calm, but William saw the tiredness in her eyes. "They've noticed," he said. Kate gave a slow nod. "I hoped it would. We must overcome it without causing Jacob to feel as though he is being taken away," she continued. The problem was that they had succeeded in providing the youngster with normalcy for days, which he had not experienced in a long time. He would feel like he was being passed around again with every abrupt change. William sat in the drawing room later that night with George and Jacob. Both lads had been looking at an atlas while a fire was burning, naming the nations they hoped to visit in the future. William spoke after waiting for a lull in their exchange. "I have a question for you, Jacob," he whispered softly. Jacob raised his head. "Would you mind if we looked for a neighboring location for you and your mother? Something secure where you can continue your education while she gets back on her feet?" Jacob took a while to respond. He gazed down at the book's cover as he closed it. He said, "I don't want to go. Not quite yet." George looked at his father, who was now obviously anxious. Could he just stay a little while longer? Between them, William glanced. "I swear, we'll only do what seems right, but this is about giving him and his mother a fresh start." William called again later that evening, this time to a nearby housing support unit that assisted families in need. He desired options, locations that were accessible for visits, schools in the area, and agencies that were willing to assist, all of which had to be handled tactfully and without making headlines. Kate, meantime, started to gently get Jacob ready for the prospect of change. She handled it the same way she usually handled significant occasions, with love and baby steps. She reassured Jacob that he could talk to her, that nothing would happen without warning, and that George would always be a part of his life. Then, however, an unforeseen event occurred. One of the tabloids ran the title, "Who is Prince George's Mystery Friend?" on Friday morning. The picture appeared fuzzy and far away. The connotation was obvious, even though it was obviously taken from a considerable distance from the Windsor estate. George's life had a new boy, and the media demanded explanations. William was drinking tea in the kitchen when he noticed it. Like a warning, the words glowed on the screen. Kate entered a few moments later, already conscious. "How do we proceed?" she inquired. "We keep them safe?" William said. He wasn't referring only to Jacob and George. He was referring to the entire family, because this story wouldn't be a footnote in a gossip section if it got out of hand. Everything he and Kate had worked so hard to create, a house where their kids could feel secure and a life where they could be compassionate without it becoming a show, would be put to the test. William spoke with the palace communications staff that afternoon. He did not want the narrative to be denied. That would only make things worse. Rather, he requested quiet. No images, no confirmation, nothing that would make the incident public. Surprisingly, there was no pressure from the media. After a few days, most people stopped speculating. Perhaps it was due to the lack of an official response. Perhaps because the story didn't suit their typical plot. Or perhaps they realized this was not a story to make up, and life went on inside the cottage. Jacob and George stayed close. They played, laughed, and whispered secrets when they believed no one was listening, even though they knew the adults were working on something behind the scenes. One evening, William looked out the window at them. The garden is painted gold by the setting light. He considered the type of king he hoped to become. The type of person who raised a son, knew how to provide care, behaved even when it was inconvenient, and didn't wait for the cameras before doing what was right. Not just the type that opened hospitals or gave speeches. However, things were shifting. They wouldn't have Jacob for long. However, none of them realized how fast the following turn would arrive. Late on a Sunday afternoon, the call came in. They had found Jacob's mother. She had been in a shelter in a nearby town after escaping a challenging circumstance. She hadn't been able to contact her kid for days because her phone had been taken. She had been searching for him, contacting support groups, and even taking a stroll around the Hope neighborhood around Lambrook School. She reportedly started crying when the social worker told her where Jacob was and who had been taking care of him. It was Prince William who answered the phone. With one hand on the chair's back, he stood in his home office. The other listened to every word while gripping the phone. "We've made sure Jacob feels safe and taken care of," he stated quietly. "Indeed, we are able to set up a private meeting for you two." He sat for a time after hanging up. Even though it was the moment he knew was coming, it nonetheless struck with more force than he had anticipated. George and Jacob were downstairs using Legos to construct something. Kate watched William go into the room as she looked up from the kitchen. He nodded to her. "She's located." Kate let out a long breath. Her face was simultaneously filled with relief and grief. William called George aside once more later that night, this time in the backyard. The sun had set just beyond the tree line, and it was a cold evening. Before William eventually spoke, George and his father strolled side by side in silence. "Mom is secure with Jacob. She has been trying to find him." George glanced down at the grass after blinking. "He's leaving then? He'll be reunited with her, but that doesn't end." William responded. George nodded slowly, but William could see the conflict in his son's face. He was proud, but also a bit heartbroken. "No, I really liked having him here," George said quietly. "I know," William replied, "and I think he really liked being here too. You gave him something he'll never forget." That evening, Jacob was told the news. At first, he didn't react. Then, after a few seconds, he smiled. "Can I see her soon?" he asked. "You can see her tomorrow," Kate replied softly. Social services set up a meeting for the next day. It took place at a calm, safe house where reunions could take place without any pressure, not in the palace or any other official location. Kate and William did not go. They wanted Jacob and his mother to be the only ones enjoying the occasion. George, however, asked to accompany him. Jacob paused at the door, his fingers quivering a little as they got there. George nudged him lightly. "She's waiting for you." And with that, Jacob walked inside. The hug between mother and son lasted for nearly 2 minutes. George stood off to the side, holding Kate's hand, watching silently. After the reunion, there were plans to place Jacob and his mother into temporary housing not far from Windsor. William had ensured that any arrangements would allow Jacob to continue seeing George in a real private way, like play dates, school meetups, and holidays. Back home that evening, George was unusually quiet. "Do you think he'll be okay?" he asked Kate. "I think he's going to be more than okay," she said. "Thanks to you." Later that week, William sat in his office reading letters from the palace's internal staff. Some had caught wind of what had happened. A few words had leaked through small talk or soft chatter among staff, but the notes weren't filled with questions. They were full of admiration, praise, and gratitude that something human had happened within those walls. One letter stood out. A gardener had written a short note. I've worked here nearly 30 years. I've seen princes, dukes, kings in waiting. But what your son did, that was different. William folded the paper and set it down. The press eventually moved on. With no public statement, no official confirmation, the buzz around George's mystery friend faded. A few headlines wondered, a few speculated, but then they let it go. But inside Adelaide Cottage, nothing was the same. George wasn't just a boy who lived in a royal house anymore. He was the boy who brought someone home because he saw something no one else did. And William? He had always known his son would carry the weight of the crown someday, but now he knew something else too. George wouldn't just wear it, he'd earn it. And it started with one simple act. He made room for someone else. What do you think about George's act of kindness? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear them. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the following video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.